humblemud.
My childhood SNES collection. Today, we're going to be revisiting the games that my uncle gave to me when I was in 1st or 2nd grade. He surprised me around my birthday with his original Super Nintendo, in addition to the 20 games that he had collected himself. I thought it would be so fun and so nostalgic to revisit these games and then give my thoughts on how good I think these games are now that I have more experience. And then at the end of this video, I'm going to talk about some substitutions that I think my childhood self would have really appreciated to have instead. I think this one is going to be a lot of fun. I have a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it. I took the time to list all of these games in alphabetical order, and so the first one that we're going to be talking about is Aero the Acrobat. And the funny thing about this is actually the very first game that I ever played on my Super Nintendo. I was a young dumb kid and I saw this Bat character Aero, and being obsessed with Batman at the time, I thought maybe he had something to do with Batman, like maybe he was some sort of cartoon Batman sidekick or something like that. And I remember asking my uncle if he was a Batman character and he said something like, sure. So that was the first one I dived into. Oddly enough, it does have some things in common with Batman. I mean, you are a bat-themed character taking down clowns. The game takes place in this circus setting, and Aero himself is one of those classic 90s style platformer mascot characters that's meant to mimic the attitude of characters like Sonic the Hedgehog. And considering that I never grew up with a Sega system other than a Sega Game Gear, this was basically the closest thing I had to a Sonic the Hedgehog style game. I have a really soft spot for this game, being the first one that ever introduced me to the Super Nintendo, and while it's definitely not the best game ever, I think it has a lot of charm in its animations. The music, while sometimes a little obnoxious, is ambitious, and I think it's a pretty good looking game. I was pretty pleased and surprised to see that it got a re-release on the Switch, and while it's not the best thing out there, it's a good solid platformer. And the next game we're going to talk about is Art of Fighting. Now, oddly enough, this was a game that I did not like as a kid. To be honest with you, it was just too hard for me. You have to remember, I was in 1st or 2nd grade when I played this. I was always drawn to the story mode because I thought it was really cool that there was a fighting game that had some semblance of a story mode to it, and essentially in this game you are playing as either Rio or Robert, who are going on a quest to save Rio's sister Yuri, who has been kidnapped. I approached all of these games just like I did when I was a kid. I didn't look anything up. I went straight into it blind and just tried my best to kind of replicate that experience that I had. And right off the bat, I was reminded why this game was so hard for me as a kid. Rio's kicks and punches don't have a lot of range, and so in that very first fight, I couldn't win. The game is a little stiff in its movements, and so when you combine that with Rio's short range, that very first fight was a big hurdle for me as a kid. Now, for some reason, I wasn't as drawn to Robert as a kid, and so I never played as him, but of course as an adult, I gave him a try now, and then that ended up being the ticket for me. And then suddenly, Art of Fighting became a game I enjoy so much more now as an adult. And honestly, I might even run all the way through the story mode now. I really like the big character sprites in this game, how the camera zooms in and zooms out, the environments are really cool, the story mode is honestly not that bad, and I also like how you do these extra challenges that actually teach you how to do combos and special moves. Robert thankfully has so much more range with his long legs, so this game was a pleasant surprise for me. I did not expect to enjoy it as much as I did. This next game is hilarious. Yes, I had a copy of Beavis and Butthead for the Super Nintendo. I always wanted to like this game as a kid because the game does a great job of capturing the vibe and the humor and the stupidity of Beavis and Butthead, but when you actually get into the game, it's just not that fun. You're constantly being bombarded with enemies. Literally everyone in the school just seems to have a vendetta against Beavis and Butthead, and so while this game will make you laugh if you're a fan of the show, and the music and the sprite work is really not that bad, it just gets repetitive really quickly, and though I'm better at it now because I've gotten some Mega Man experience under my belt, that doesn't change the fact that the enemies and constant projectiles and things to dodge are just kind of annoying in this game. And I also found it really odd that after you make it through the hallways of the school, go through the gym, and defeat the boss, right after that you enter a new set of hallways that looks identical to the hallways that you were just in before, so there's not really like a feeling of progression. And I don't know what anyone can really expect from a Beavis and Butthead game, but this is the definition of like a 5 out of 10 game. It is a little better than I remember, but that's honestly just because I'm better at games than I was back then. I still think I would have enjoyed a bunch of other games over this one. Okay, and now we're on to a big one. Earthbound is my favorite game of all time. So needless to say, this was a game I fell in love with as a kid and I still love even today. There was a period in my life where I would revisit this game and beat it at least once a year. Earthbound was a game that changed my life, and there's so much that I want to say about this game. I would ideally like to do some kind of deep dive review type video on this game one day. It's just honestly so much pressure for me to even think about that because I love this game so much that if I were to make a review, I would want it to be perfect as I see the game. And currently I just haven't gotten to that point yet. But yeah, this is my #1 favorite game of all time. I'm so thankful that I had this game. Even if every other game that I had in this collection was trash, Earthbound would more than enough carry my Super Nintendo experience. I love the music in this game, the humor, how it's not afraid to get dark and a little creepy at times, and the modern day setting was unlike anything else that I had ever seen before in an RPG. And I think this game really holds up even today, despite the fact that the beginning of the game is probably the hardest part of the game because SNES starts off so weak. But yeah, this is a classic for a reason. I'm so glad that it's gotten so much retrospective praise over the years. Definitely don't sleep on this game, it's such a gem. And speaking of gyms, we're going to go to Earthworm Jim. Now, this is going to be a running theme with this video. As a kid, I really sucked at this game, and so I was actually looking forward to playing this now because I thought I would enjoy it a whole lot more since, you know, I'm a little bit better. But to be honest with you, I don't know. I love Earthworm Jim as a character. Even in that not so great fighting game, Clay Fighter 63 1/3, I always played as Earthworm Jim because I do like him. I remember even thinking about movesets for him in Smash Bros. And how I feel like he would at least be a good assist trophy character. But I don't know, revisiting this game, while it has a lot of charm and a lot of quirkiness and a lot of humor, and at times I really think the graphics are pretty good, I just don't really like the level design. I don't really like bouncing on the tires and things like that. The crows are extremely annoying foes, and surprisingly, I just didn't find myself enjoying it too much. I don't know exactly what it is. This was never my favorite game out of my collection, but it was one that I had a really positive association with, and so revisiting it now, it was a little bit of a disappointment. I don't know, I guess I just feel like there are a lot of better games in a similar genre, and honestly, when we're talking about video game worms, I would just rather play Worms. So I had to put you guys down so I could lift you back up. F-Zero is my next game. Now this was a game I really loved as a kid. And obviously I didn't start off great, but I slowly got better at it. This is one of those games where I felt a sense of progression for sure. But with time and perspective, I really feel like this game has aged like a fine wine. And I feel like something that helps prove that this game just had a winning formula from the beginning is F-Zero 99. A lot of people love that. A lot of people say it's their favorite F-Zero game in the whole series. The cool thing about the classic F-Zero is even if you're someone who is obsessed with 99, you can come back to this one and it has a distinct feeling. It feels similar to 99 obviously, but with less vehicles and less boosting and things like that, it has a different feeling all on its own. And I think it's nice that you can go to F-Zero and you can go to F-Zero 99 and neither one of them really cancel each other out. The music in this game is top tier, the game feel is top tier. This is the best racing game on the Super Nintendo. Honestly, I could care less about Super Mario Kart when I have F-Zero in my hands. And to me, this is a game that has only gotten better with time. While I'm not even sure I would have ranked it in the top 5 of my collection when I was a kid, honestly I feel like this is like right behind Earthbound for me. This game is so good, it's just become a comfort game over time, and it absolutely holds up. It's so fun. Now we're going to go on to another great game, this one being Fatal Fury 2. A lot of people were like, who is that when Terry Bogard got added to Smash, but I feel like I was one of the few people in the US that was so excited about it because Terry Bogard is just such a G. He just oozes charisma, he's one of my favorite fighting game characters ever, and this game was my introduction to him. Now, I wasn't the best with him back then, I didn't really understand how to do special moves and things like that like I do now, and so back in the day, I actually used to play as Big Bear, and I think that's because he just hit really hard, and so I think that kind of made up for the fact that I didn't know how to do special moves. I would just swing my big meaty fists.
What did you say, punk? Big meaty claws!
And do a lot of damage, but nowadays I can't even imagine playing as him. Joe Higashi and Terry Bogard are definitely my favorites. Kim Kafwan is the bane of my existence and absolutely beat my several times when I revisited this game today. And another character that I tried out for the first time actually was Mai, and she is really fun. One of the things that was really cool about this game is that you could go back and forth between the foreground and the background. This was the only fighting game I had that would allow you to do that, and I think it's just got a really good, memorable cast of characters. Now we have a couple of other fighting games to go through. Mortal Kombat 2. hear me out, this might be a little controversial, but man, revisiting this game now, I was reminded just how cheap the AI is. It feels like they read every move you do, they block everything, they just spam the same moves over and over again, and even when I turned the difficulty down a little bit just so that I could just enjoy the game and relearn my own specials and stuff, I was just not having fun. I was really surprised because I love the Mortal Kombat characters. Mortal Kombat has some of my favorite fighting game characters of all time, hands down, but nowadays I think I would really just prefer to play Mortal Kombat 9 or X, and these 2D ones are just not quite as fun. I think Mortal Kombat 2 is a lot more fun playing against a human, but going through these AI campaigns, it was just not fun. I know that one might be a surprise to you. Trust me, it was a surprise to me too, because in my mind as a kid, this game was only second to one other fighting game. But nowadays, I definitely don't feel like I'm as much of a classic Mortal Kombat fan as I used to be.
It's official. You suck.
Okay, so now we're going to add some controversy on top of some controversy. Like I said, it might have surprised you that I didn't really like Mortal Kombat 2 revisiting it, and it may surprise you even more that when I revisited Power Instinct, this fighting game that no one really plays that's a parody of other fighting games, man, I had a blast. I only played as Keith because I remember really enjoying his character as a kid, and all of his special moves just made sense to me. I like how you can kind of chain special moves together, so you can do this move where you fly across the air, doing these crazy kicks, and then you do kind of like a rising foot uppercut, sort of like a Shoryuken but with your legs. And I don't know, the game just flowed really well and has really wacky off-the-wall characters. Probably the most memorable one is this old lady that actually shoots dentures at her opponents as a projectile, and she also has this really crazy ability where if she kisses you, it restores her youth, and then she turns into this pretty much faster moving woman. I like how when you're about to go into a fight, the characters make a face right before the fight is about to begin, and I like those little mascot characters that jump around and cheer when the fight's about to begin. I don't know, I remember liking this game as a kid, but playing it now as an adult, I really feel like it's kind of underrated. Has anyone even heard of this game? Have you ever played this game? Let me know what you think. Okay, we're done with fighting games for a second. I've got one more on the list to go through, but for now, we're going to cover the one shooter that I had in my collection, Raiden Trad. I honestly really don't remember much of anything about this game as a kid. I must have not played it much. And when I went to revisit it, I can kind of see why. Raiden Trad is not bad. It's a competent game. It's well made. There weren't any glitches that I could see. The music is pretty good. The graphics are okay. But it was just kind of boring. Like, it's really slow and the movement is kind of jerky. And I just wasn't really enjoying myself. It just doesn't quite move fast enough. And it doesn't help that I have so much more experience with shooters nowadays. It's one of my favorite genres, one of my comfort genres for sure. And when you compare this to some of the games that you could get on the Genesis or the PC Engine, I just don't think that this one compares. Now, I don't know how the original arcade version is compared to this, but I have heard people say that the Super Nintendo port is not the best, so don't take this as me knocking Raiden Trad as a whole. It's just that the Super Nintendo version at least is not that great in my opinion. This is definitely a game that I have some substitutions in mind for this because the Super Nintendo does have some good shooters, even though that's not necessarily the genre that this console is known for. So if you're interested in finding out about some good Super Nintendo shooters, stick around to the end of this video. Now, this isn't a 1v1 fighter in the traditional sense, but this is a beat 'em up. This next one is Sonic Blast Man. As a kid, I really liked this game. I thought that the character was kind of cool. You know, anything superhero related was cool to me. And he kind of has this Captain Falcon vibe to him. I see the appeal of that slow walk he does. He walks across the screen like he's the Terminator or something like that. But revisiting this game now, there are so many better beat 'em ups, and this one just feels so slow. The only way to really progress across the screen at a decently fast rate is to jump constantly, which looks kind of goofy. And this game is just begging for like a double tap dash type thing, either forward or backward. It would make this game feel so much better. The graphics are good, the music is memorable, I still remember the music to this day, but man, even on the Super Nintendo alone, there are just so many better beat 'em ups. It's kind of the same thing as Raiden Trad. These games were really the only examples I had back then as a kid, so I didn't know any better, but now with more experience, yeah, there's so many things I would rather play. And I did want to say I haven't tried it myself, but I've heard that Sonic Blast Man 2 is way better. I think you can choose between like 2 or 3 different characters, it's got a lot more variety, so don't completely rule this this franchise out, but the first one is honestly not really that good. Okay, the last fighting game on this list, and it's a big one. Street Fighter 2 Turbo. This game is perfection, and similar to F-Zero, this is one that has only gotten better in my mind with time. And I'm so glad that alphabetically it worked out that this was the last fighting game on the list for me to play, because going from Art of Fighting to Fatal Fury 2 to Mortal Kombat and Power Instinct, it really gave me a lot of perspective going between all of these back to back as to why Street Fighter 2 Turbo is just considered such a classic. It's all in the name, Turbo. This game is so fast, so fluid, and while I'm sure that this version of the game doesn't necessarily even hold a candle to the arcade version of the game, it's still a good port to have on a home console, and the roster is just hard to beat. Every single character has like a different role and a different vibe and a different gameplay style. Even with the relatively small roster that it has, there's always something new to explore and learn. It feels just as good today to play as Guile or Ryu as it did back then, and this is one of those games that's honestly just not aged. And just for anyone who's curious, when I was a kid, Fatal Fury 2 was actually my favorite just because I loved Terry and Big Bear and Joe Higashi and all those guys. But now with time, Street Fighter 2 is definitely the best fighter out of the bunch that I had. Street Fighter 2 is in a league all its own when it comes to fighting games, especially when we're looking at just the small list of fighting games that I had as a kid. Now we have the Super Mario All-Stars and Mario World cartridge, honestly probably one of the best game collections of all time, even still, as it contains redone versions of Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3, as well as Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, and Super Mario World. I think the fact that this game was just blatantly re-released on the Wii for one of Mario's anniversaries says all you need to know about how good this game was. But seriously, it's really funny because that Nintendo Wii disc only has like a couple megs of information on it because Nintendo literally just lazily ported that game onto the Wii. Anyways, revisiting this now, I did notice a couple things. As a kid, I never noticed the difference between Super Mario All-Stars and the NES Mario games as far as how the games feel. Obviously, I noticed the music changes and the graphical changes, but the one downside I'll say to All-Stars that I noticed revisiting it now is the original Super Mario Bros. Definitely feels a lot different compared to the All-Stars version. In the All-Stars version, I don't know, Mario just felt a little sluggish, yet slippery at the same time. He didn't feel as good. In the original NES Super Mario Bros., I can just run through that game no problem, but in All-Stars I kept tripping up and messing up and things, and I was wondering what was going on. And there are a variety of factors. One of the things I learned is that Mario actually loses his momentum when he breaks a block now, which was definitely not the case in the original Super Mario Bros. So if I had to choose, I think I would actually rather play the NES Super Mario Bros. Nowadays. But when it comes to Super Mario Bros. 2 and 3, the All-Stars versions of these games are excellent. And in general, it's really nice to be able to save your progress in these games. Super Mario World is a classic, and even to this day, I go back and forth between whether Super Mario Bros. 3 or Super Mario World is my favorite classic 2D Mario game. I feel like there's so much that has been said about these games already that I'm not going to go too much longer on this, but yeah, this is a great collection to have overall. And between Super Mario Bros. 2, 3, and World especially, and honestly even the original Super Mario Bros. On All-Stars, I created so many fond memories back then as a kid. I'm very thankful I had this collection. It's probably what made me such a big Mario fan early on. And then the next game I'm going to talk about is the one that really sealed the deal for me on being a Mario fan. Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars is a classic. For the longest time, this was ranked second place, right behind Earthbound for me. This was the first RPG that I ever beat, and I used to replay the final boss battle over and over and over again every single day after school. I loved this game so much. I still do. I'm so glad that it got this remake. I actually got so emotional when I saw that trailer. Gino is one of my favorite video game characters of all time, and the remake actually does some things better than the original in my opinion, but especially when it comes to the graphics department, the original is just so nice. I love that claymation look. I love how Square wasn't afraid to give Mario more of a dark edge in its story and in its aesthetics, and I'm glad that Nintendo trusted them to do this too. The game also has a ton of humor because Mario is forced to follow that typical RPG silent protagonist trope, but the the way that he circumvents this is by literally acting out everything instead of just miming as if he's talking to the person or whatever, and it's just so funny. This game is absolutely a classic, still one of my all-time favorites, and while it doesn't rank quite as high for me nowadays, still a fantastic game that I could never imagine not having in a Super Nintendo collection.
The last Metroid is in captivity. The galaxy is at peace.
Super Metroid. For a lot of people, this is the greatest game on the Super Nintendo, and if you feel that way, I do not blame you whatsoever. Nowadays, I think this game is a masterpiece. The way that it effortlessly guides you to the next area, to the next upgrade, to do the next thing and think on your feet, the way that it keeps you guessing with the enemies, the tension that it builds, the atmosphere that this game has, I really don't think there's anything else on the Super Nintendo like this game. But you have to remember that when I first popped this cartridge in, I was in 1st or 2nd grade, and this game was terrifying to me back then. This was literally like my first quote-unquote horror game experience. Just the intro really scared me, just the title screen really scared me. The music is so foreboding, and it makes you feel like there's things crawling around in the background that you can't see. It's really scary, and you can definitely get the alien feel to this game. While now I think that's part of what makes this game so special, back then it was just too scary for me to play, and so I never made it very far. But I will say that even back then as a kid, I recognized from the beginning that this game was special, and I always knew in my heart that this was a good game. It's just that I was a little bit too much of a wimp to make it through. So even though I never made a lot of progress in this game, I still owe a lot to Metroid, because it was thanks to this game that I became interested in playing as Samus in Super Smash Bros. It's why I wanted to play Metroid Prime day one, and it's one of those games that almost from the onset you can tell it's a 10 out of 10 game, even if you've only played 30 minutes, because that's how I felt. I was just too scared to play it back then. But despite that, yeah, this is a game I could have never imagined not having. It left an impact on me, and is probably one of the reasons why now I am interested in horror and alien and sci-fi. And one last thing, I just love all the little details this game has, like how Samus's visor glows in the dark and the rain. This game is a masterpiece. I think I'm probably going to revisit it after this video. So now we're going to go from one of the greatest games of all time to, in my opinion, on my notes I literally wrote this game sucks ass. Super Play Action Football. Oh man. So to be honest, I'm not a big sports games guy. I love extreme sports, I love racing games, I love sports games that give you a little comic mischief or violence, I guess you could say. But realistic sports simulators have just never really been that interesting to me. So I am biased, but I tried to give this game a shot, and like I said, I played this game the same way that I would have as a kid, meaning not looking anything up, not learning how to play every single thing. I only had a cartridge in front of me, stuck into a Super Nintendo with a CRT in front of me, right? And that's how I basically played this game today. And I could not for the life of me figure out the controls. Right off the bat, I think I threw the ball into the void behind me, ruined my very first play. And really, the only redeeming thing that I can say about this game is I love how the coin toss has Mario on one side and the Tanuki tail on the other side. I don't think the graphics of this game are very good. It looks like a Sega Master System game to me. And yeah, I just never really enjoyed this. Time Tracks. So this is a game that's based on a show apparently. I've never watched the show before. I tried to pay attention to the mini cutscenes and walls of text that are in the beginning of this game, but just like I did as a kid, I ended up skipping through it because I don't have time for that. I feel like maybe it would be cool if you were a fan of this show to see, but for me it was just not worth it. I never made it very far in this game. I remember finding it really hard, but I gave it a lot of tries as a kid because I always thought there was something there. Revisiting it today, I will say it's better than I remember, but I'm still overall kind of lukewarm on it. I totally forgot that he basically has a stun gun. It's not lethal, so the very first guard I fought, I just kept shooting him, waiting for him to die, and then realized that it's not until I actually swing a punch at him that he'll explode. So sorry about that, dude. I didn't mean to torture you there. This game does have some redeeming elements to it. I think if I gave it more of a shot, it could be fun, but the very first boss fight that I came across was really not fun at all. And again, it's just one of those things where I feel like there are so many better games in this genre, even on just the Super Nintendo alone. This might have been fun for like a Blockbuster rental, but it's definitely not a game that I would have owned and like had in my collection for the rest of my life, you know what I mean? I will say that one thing I thought that this game does that was really cool was that there are enemies in the foreground, as in between yourself and the action going on screen, like the spider here, and they will actually jump out at you as you move forward, and so you've kind of got to keep your eyes everywhere. I thought that was really cool. There are also these snipers, I guess, that are shooting at you duck hunt style that constantly keep pressure on you. I thought that was really cool too. I think there is something to this game, and if someone told me that they were a big fan of it and think it's underrated, I could totally get behind that, because maybe it is, but I totally understood also why as a kid I just didn't really enjoy myself. Okay, we're going to cover one more game that I didn't like too much, but we've got two more strong ones after this, so just hang in there with me. Wolfchild. Man, for a game that has such a kind of cool retro-looking box art, that title screen is so bad. He looks like He-Man drawn in MS Paint or something. But then, keeping along with that theme of mixed presentation, when you get into the game, the graphics are actually pretty cool. The music is cool. This game has a bit of atmosphere going on. You're on this ship that's apparently going really fast, because when you punch the enemies, they literally like fly off the screen and get caught in the wind. I thought that was kind of a cool effect. And as the name suggests, you can actually turn into a werewolf once you get enough of these power-ups, and you can shoot projectiles. Wolfchild honestly has so much potential, but again, like, I would just rather play Mega Man or something if I were going to play a game like this, you know what I mean? It's so easy to take a couple hits and then lose that wolf power-up you have, and so the wolf power-up itself doesn't really feel that strong. I wish you had at least 3 or 4 more hits attached to the wolf form, and I kept getting to this part where I had to fight this machine with my bare fists because it would hit me and I would lose my wolf form, and so now I'm hitting this machine with my hands, which just looks kind of silly. But the third time I tried it, I thought, no, I'm going to learn the pattern, right? And so I managed to keep the wolf power up and get past the machine this time. But then this enemy that flies across the screen, and you'll see this a lot with Super Nintendo games, there are enemies that fly across the screen in like Metroid. You'll see that from the beginning with Ridley. But the difference here with Metroid in this game is it's kind of cheap. Like, the hawk drops this bomb on you and it explodes in 4 or 5 different places on the map, and you have no indication of where it's going to explode. So you're inevitably going to lose that wolf power up if you've managed to hold on to it for this long. And so yeah, on my third try getting to this hawk and trying to keep my wolf power up so I could see the potential that this game's combat might have, I immediately lost it because I haven't gotten enough time to learn the pattern of this explosion, and it's not interesting enough to want to do that. And so in the end, I ended up just ducking and punching, which wasn't really fun either. Yeah, this game is really not good. It's like a 3 out of 10 for me. Okay, we are finally through some of the trash. Sorry, I gave you guys like 3 in a row. This next one is Yoshi's Island, and I know that technically it's Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island. Even Shigeru Miyamoto said it's supposed to be a sequel to Mario World, but I don't think anyone really feels like it's a Mario World sequel. And so Yoshi's Island is what I call it, but regardless, this game is awesome. It's honestly better than I remember. I was so annoyed as a kid at the crying baby Mario, and that hasn't changed. I actually found a Super Nintendo ROM hack that you can get that silences him when he cries, and I kind of want to try that out because I feel like that would make this game so much better. But revisiting it now as an adult, considering that the crying baby Mario was really all I remember, I was expecting to not enjoy this that much. Yoshi's Woolly World is one of my recent favorite Yoshi games, and until I jumped back into this one, I thought Yoshi's Woolly World was probably my favorite Yoshi game. But as soon as I jumped back into this one, I remembered why it's still kind of considered the GOAT of the franchise by most people. The game is just so snappy. Everything feels intentional, the way that the enemies are placed, everything has so much charm. This game introduced so much to the Mario universe. It gave Shy Guys the personalities that you would go on to see in games like Mario Kart. It gave Yoshi pretty much his entire moveset that you'll see replicated in Smash Bros. The music is top notch. There really isn't a Super Nintendo game that looks like this, and I think especially when I try the silenced Mario mod, I might actually go back and play this game all the way through for the first time. It just feels so good. But don't get me wrong, there's a reason why crying baby Mario is not not a thing in the newer Yoshi games. Okay, the last Super Nintendo game I have on my list is a great one. Zombies Ate My Neighbors. Now, I know earlier I said that I was scared of Super Metroid and I kind of considered that almost like a horror game, and you could maybe lump Zombies Ate My Neighbors in with this, just in the name and the concept alone, but this is so much more of like a horror comedy B-movie type of vibe, and it never scared me as a kid, other than the chainsaw guys. They're kind of terrifying. Oh, and the little Chucky dolls with the knives. Those are kind of scary too. Okay, so yeah, this game has some scary moments, but I mean, you're shooting zombies with water guns and throwing popsicles at them and stuff. It's not really that scary. The vibes of this game are off the charts. It has so much charm and humor. It's so quirky. The music is really, really good, and it just bleeds like 90s vibes. I love that the main boy character wears 3D glasses for some reason. Even though it logically doesn't make sense, it just looks super like rad in like a 90s sense, you know what I mean? And this game just absolutely holds up. I think the art style is really great too. This game is an absolute classic in my opinion, a must-have on the Super Nintendo, and while I wasn't very good at it as a kid, I always enjoyed popping this game in for quick bursts, and I can't imagine how much more fun it would be with 2 players. And really quick, before I start going over my substitutions that I think would have made a younger humblemud much happier back in the day, I wanted to give a quick shout out to the Super Game Boy accessory for the Super Nintendo. I found this at a flea market for super cheap back in the day, maybe a year or two after I had gotten the Super Nintendo. I didn't even know something like this existed, and I played so many games like Final Fantasy Adventure and Wario Land and Zen the Intergalactic Ninja, Super Mario Land 1 and 2, Star Saver, so many games, but Pokemon Blue especially is just so cool on the Super Nintendo. You get this really cool little border around the screen, as you can see here, and being able to play Pokemon on the big screen was just revolutionary to me as a kid back then. So while that wasn't part of my original Super Nintendo collection, and I wasn't even playing Super Nintendo games with this, it was definitely part of my experience and definitely worth mentioning. Now, here is the tier list I made after revisiting all of my original Super Nintendo games. In order to properly rank these games for the purposes of this video, I had to take into account how I felt about these games as a kid, and marry that with how I feel about these games now. And so while in the S tier, top tier classic ranking, Super Metroid is technically in the bottom, I definitely think Super Metroid is better than Zombies Ate My Neighbors at least, but I had to consider the fact that that game terrified me and I barely made any progress in it as a kid, so hopefully that kind of helps clear up some of these rankings here. Now, I promise I didn't do this on purpose, but when I was coming up with the games just off the top of my head that I think I would have really enjoyed to have back then as a kid, Super Nintendo games that really would have molded my gaming experience, that I couldn't have imagined how they would shape the rest of my gaming journey, I came up with 9 games, and funny enough, if you look at the bottom 3 tiers of my list, I have exactly 9 games, so I can do a 1-for-1 trade. And while now as an adult I would absolutely keep Art of Fighting in my Super Nintendo collection, and let's be honest, I would probably keep Mortal Kombat 2 and Earthworm Jim as well, we're talking about curating the best of the best Super Nintendo experience for a younger humblemud, right? So in no particular order, this is just the order that I came up with these games. The first one I would have to mention is Super Castlevania 4. This was a game that I experienced on the Wii through the Virtual Console service, and when I first played it, it absolutely blew my mind. The graphics of this game are so good, the music is so good. This was actually my introduction to the Castlevania franchise. It's what made me fall in love with Simon Belmont. Again, seeing him in Smash was so hype precisely because of this game for me. And when I look at the collection of games that I have, the one thing that I really feel like I'm missing are some good side-scrolling action adventure type games. I did have Super Metroid, but again that game terrified me, and other than that I didn't really have a really solid game in that kind of space, you know? And so Super Castlevania 4 would have filled that void and also fit in really well with the games I have here in my opinion. Another game that I think would have just blown my mind as a kid that I would have just played non-stop for hours and hours would be Contra 3: The Alien Wars. This was yet another game that I discovered on the Wii's Virtual Console. It's one of the best action games of all time. It absolutely still holds up. The weapon variety, the effects, the explosions, everything just happening all at once. It's so intense. It's just an adrenaline shot straight to your veins, filling you up with testosterone. It's so awesome. I don't really enjoy the top-down perspective levels quite as much, and I feel like that would have given me a lot of trouble initially as a kid, but I think I could have seen past that and learned. And similar to F-Zero, I think this is a game that I would have gotten gradually better and better at with time. Now, when I think about Sonic Blastman specifically, that is a beat 'em up with a sort of superhero lead, you know? And I start thinking about like, what game would I pick to basically fill that gap for a young humblemud? Well, if you remember me talking about how I was obsessed with Batman, and that's actually the reason why I played Aero the Acrobat first, it's a no-brainer. Batman Returns on the Super Nintendo freaking rules. I love the setting of this game, how it takes place during Christmas time. Such a unique setting for Batman, with the white snow everywhere contrasting against his super dark, macabre outfit. The gameplay in this game is just so awesome, and when I went to revisit it for this video, I was like, yeah, this game rules. It's so cool that if you just walk into an opponent, Batman just picks them up. You don't even have to press anything. He just picks them up and grabs them, and it really sells that sort of feeling of that intimidating presence that Batman has. And honestly, when I think about my favorite Batman games of all time, this is probably my favorite one other than the Arkham games. It's a really, really solid game, and I would have been in love with it back then. One that I think is a really big gap in my childhood collection here that many of you have probably thought about is The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. I've always loved Link as a character. I had Link's Awakening on my Game Boy. I had the Ages and Seasons Choose Your Own Adventure books. I don't even know if you guys knew that existed, but I was always a fan of Link, and I think Link to the Past would have just been a life-changing game for me to play as a kid. I played it for the first time several years later in 2023 and definitely saw what all the hype was about, but experiencing it as a kid would have just been magical. When I think of Super Nintendo platformers that rival the Mario experience, the first series to come to mind for me is Donkey Kong Country. And I know everybody's got different opinions on which is the best out of the three, but I'm going to pick the first one just because, again, as a kid, I think it would have been nice to start with the first one, right? The graphics on this game would have absolutely blown me away. They're similar to Super Mario RPG's claymation kind of style, and the atmosphere in this game is so awesome. I love the second rainy level in the game. The music is so good. The gameplay is fantastic. It would have fit right in. This is a no-brainer. This next one is a little different, and I think it would have stretched me a little bit as a kid. Like maybe I wouldn't have gotten into it the very first year I had the Super Nintendo, but maybe as I got a little older, I probably would have played it. But this is another one I played on the Wii, ActRaiser. Man, this game is so good. This is one of my favorite Super Nintendo games of all time, easily. You're essentially playing as this god who is sending a representative down to destroy the monsters that are plaguing the lands, and once you clear the area of the monsters and the boss, you then transfer from doing this action platformer type game to a god sim type game where you're playing as an angel now and you're shooting the monsters that are up in the sky to defend your people while they're building their town, and you help guide their town. You can cast miracles down like thunderstorms to clear shrubbery and brush out of the way so that they can start to build roads, and then they start to help you as well. They learn how to grow crops, or they can even learn how to seal monster lairs for you, and it just got such an awesome gameplay loop, and there's really nothing else like it. Even ActRaiser 2 dropped that whole sim element, which is the whole thing that made this game special. But yeah, like I said, I don't think I would have understood this game at first, and I probably would have found the action-adventure parts of it a little difficult, but again, with this ideal collection, I think Super Castlevania 4 would have gotten me really interested in ActRaiser, and then once I started to get the hang of the sim elements, I would just be vibing. Like, this game is so good. I can't stress enough how good this game is. Definitely play it. Don't play the remake. Get the SNES version however you can, and just play it. It's so good. Now, while I was gushing about Batman Returns earlier, hands down, my favorite SNES beat-em-up game is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Turtles in Time. I mean, what hasn't been said about this game? I love the Ninja Turtles, I always have, and this game is just so fun. I can't imagine how much fun my brother and I would have had being able to play this game co-op back in the day. This game has so much attitude, it perfectly captures the 90s cartoons. There's plenty of cowabungas and pizza and so many just fun things that are happening all at once. Being able to throw the enemies right towards the screen is still super impressive to see even today. This game is just phenomenal. While I think this alternate younger humblemud would have fallen in love with beat-em-ups through Batman Returns, it's Turtles in Time that would cement that love as lifelong. This game is just honestly that good. Now, when I was thinking about Raid and Trad specifically, I was thinking about what other shmups on the SNES did I really enjoy back in the day. And my first thought was R-Type, and as I started to dig a little bit more, I realized that I was actually thinking of Gradius, which is the game that I again played on the Wii Virtual Console a whole lot. And by the way, all of my SNES footage is from my Nintendo Wii. I just love the way the games turn out when I capture footage of them here. It reminds me a lot of how they used to look when I was playing on my old TV back in the day. But yeah, so I guess my choice technically should be Gradius, but R-Type 3 was the one I downloaded because I misremembered it, and man, this game is sick too. You could substitute R-Type 3, Super R-Type, or Gradius here. Any of those games, I don't care. They are all better by a significant margin compared to the SNES version of Raid and Trad at least. I love the graphics of this game, and even though it doesn't technically go super fast, it feels and looks like it's going super fast because of all the things scrolling and all of the material and different things going on screen. Yeah, it's just awesome. It's so fun. And again, kind of like how Batman Returns or Turtles in Time would really have helped shape my vision back then during those formative years when it comes to beat 'em ups, I think something like R-Type 3 or Gradius would have really just blown my mind and gotten me really interested in shmups. The first games to really get me into shooters were Galaga and Einhander, which I experienced for the first time on the PlayStation 1, considering that Galaga was on the Namco Museum collection. But if I had grown up with R-Type or Gradius first, dude, I would have been in heaven. I would have been a shmup fan from day one. And the final game I'm going to mention, one that you guys are probably like, why hasn't he talked about this one yet, is Chrono Trigger. I think that if I could have any other RPG to add to this collection, because honestly I felt pretty satisfied with the RPG collection I had, even though it was only 2 games, they were so solid and so influential for me during those formative years. Chrono Trigger would have fit right at home with Super Mario RPG and Earthbound. I think that I would have beaten Super Mario RPG first, probably Earthbound second, and then Chrono Trigger would have been the next one. Chrono Trigger feels a little more adult. It feels like there's a little bit more going on in this world, and I feel like Mario was kind of my gateway drug into RPGs. Earthbound had that cutesy art style that suddenly hits you with some real adult stuff towards the end, and then Chrono Trigger would have been that natural next step for me. I love this game. It's so good. It deserves all the praise it gets. Really tightly paced, just like Super Mario RPG or Earthbound, and fits right into that whole vibe in my opinion. Now, I know there's probably some other Super Nintendo games you guys think I probably should have included. Some other ones I really like are stuff like Pocky and Rocky, for example, and I know I'm missing some Final Fantasy, but again, I'm thinking about things that I would have enjoyed as a kid, and I'm thinking about things that I would have possibly have heard of as a kid. But yeah, this list has a lot of Konami in it. Man, I would have been the biggest Konami fan ever back then if I had had these games. I know this has gone on long enough. I haven't edited this voiceover. I did this completely non-scripted, so let me know if you liked the feel of this. Hopefully it doesn't run too long for you. Hopefully this was just a really fun little trip down memory lane for you. Maybe you saw some games that you grew up with and were interested to see my thoughts. Maybe there's some Super Nintendo games that I didn't even talk about that you would love to hear my thoughts on or want to tell me about, maybe so I can check those out. But yeah, I've gone on long enough. Anyway, here's the final list of the games that I think would have been perfect for a younger humblemud, just as a quick recap. And if you're still here, sincerely, thanks so much for watching. I know I went on forever, and as always, stay humble.